An historic day in our nation's capital. Former President Trump will be arraigned for the third time this year, this time in a D.C. courtroom.
What the president wants to do is absolutely defend himself on these baseless charges.
The alleged crimes, attempting to overturn the 2020 election, efforts that culminated in one of the darkest days of our democracy.
Sadly, the president was surrounded by a group of crackpot lawyers that kept telling him what his itching ears wanted to hear.
From the courtroom.
Well, the big thing that the government is going to have to prove is what Trump's mental state was. Did he have a good faith belief that he had won the election?
To your neighborhood. Our team is working to make sure you know what's happening in our backyard as security tightens and roads close. This team is focusing on what really matters. WUSA 9 News at 4 starts right now. And thank you for joining us this afternoon on WUSA 9 Plus. I'm Leslie Foster, and by now you know, breaking. Former President Trump is making his third court appearance, his first here in D.C., and this all surrounds his alleged attempt to overturn the 2020 election. This is a live look at the federal courthouse where the former president arrived minutes ago. He left Reagan National Airport just after 2:30 this afternoon, and our team has been watching his every move. We're on top of everything unfolding in our backyard. We're going to begin with Adam Longo, who is outside the courthouse. And Adam, set the scene for us. How was it when the president arrived?
Well, that's a great point. Here at our location along Pennsylvania Avenue and 4th Street, we didn't even see the president and his motorcade arrive. All of the folks that are out here spectating, all of the media, didn't get a glimpse of the former president or his motorcade at all, very likely taking a back road entrance to the back of the courthouse, which is where the underground access is to get into the federal courthouse here. When you talk about the scene out here, I can honestly tell you there are more media and onlookers here than there are protesters or critics of the former president. Now, take a look here. So what I'm showing you now is Pennsylvania Avenue headed towards the Capitol. There's just a lot of folks just sort of milling about, wanting to take in this scene for themselves on this historic day in Washington. There are media tents that literally encircle the entirety of the federal court facility here, including all the way up here along 4th Street. There is extra security plastered around the courthouse. We've got the Secret Service, the U.S. Marshal Service, Federal Protective Service, and of course the Metropolitan Police Department as well. So everyone here on high alert while the former president at this very minute is inside of the courtroom going through his arraignment. Our producer and reporter Jordan Fisher is inside of the courtroom right now. As soon as the hearing wraps up, he's going to be able to make a beeline to our location to share some of the ins and outs of what was happening. Jordan has been our man on the scene from the beginning with all of the January 6th defendants who have been arrested and tried right here in this courthouse behind me. Now let's talk about the charges, the 4 felony charges that Donald Trump is facing and having to answer to for the first time right now. So Trump is facing these charges brought by special counsel Jack Smith. It includes conspiracy to defraud the U.S., conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, obstruction of an attempt to obstruct an official proceeding, and conspiracy against rights. Now, Trump posted on his Truth Social media account earlier today that he doesn't believe he can get a fair trial in Washington, D.C. Of course, saying this because the district voted democratically overwhelming, better than 94% in the 2020 election. He and his lawyers suggesting that the case should be moved to someplace perhaps more impartial, like West Virginia. And I know that we have a legal analyst here with our show that we'll be able to bring you here shortly. I'd be interested to get their take on this change of venue. And I'd be interested to ask Jordan as well, who's inside right now and has covered these cases, if any of the January 6th defendants have gone through that. Have they asked for this change of venue motion? And have any of them been successful? Mainly these motions boil down to, if they're accepted, whether the pre-trial publicity is having an undue burden effect on the potential jury pool. Well, everyone around the country, whether you're in D.C., West Virginia, or in Alaska, everyone saw the coverage of January 6th. Everyone knows what unfolded. It's not like folks here in D.C. were any more or less prejudiced to what was happening compared to other places around the country. Now, so the president, former President Trump, is facing considerable legal turmoil. Of course, this particular set of charges related to January 6th is not the only legal proceeding that he's facing. Got a timeline of his legal calendar that I'd like to throw out to you here so you can see this. So in October 1st of this year, and of course this is all just tentative, this is on the schedule right now, there is scheduled to be the New York civil fraud trial. In January of next year, that's going to be the E. Jean Carroll civil defamation trial. In March, the New York hush money trial is set to start. And in May, as of right now, again, tentatively, the DOJ classified documents trial will begin. Now, I want to talk to you more about the scene a little bit further out of here. How is this affecting working and functioning D.C.? The fact that all of the roads are affected with the president's motorcade coming to and from National Airport to the scene here at the courthouse. Our traffic specialist, Lindsay Nance, is with us tonight to talk about some of these rolling road closures. And Lindsay, how do you expect traffic will be impacted as we move throughout the evening?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Adam. I can already see traffic really starting to build up on 395. Here's a live look back in Arlington for you at 395 North heading inbound. I just saw on Twitter a few minutes ago the motorcade moving through the 3rd Street tunnel right around C Street. That's the area I would avoid, and that's where I saw police blocking off a portion of that off-ramp. Now, when we get into it around Constitution Avenue Northwest, that's of course the main area you're going to want to avoid for the next few hours, as we do have several road closures in place. So above the Capitol around Chinatown, we have portions of H Street closing down, 6th Street and 3rd Street, and then closer to below the Capitol, Constitution Avenue as well as Pennsylvania Avenue. So to sum it up for you, most of these closures are going to be from Penn Quarter all the way up towards Capital One Arena as well as Chinatown. That's the main area that I would avoid if I were you going through evening rush traffic. Below that again, Penn Corner right around the Capitol. We don't know when these road restrictions will be lifted, but of course I will be here for you, letting you know the second I see that happen. Now, here's what's open. 395 is open for you right now, but extremely slow going. 695 or Southeast Southwest Freeway is also open, and from what I can see on the overhead cameras, it looks like you can still access Mass Ave. If I were you driving around, I would probably go through Navy Yard. Try and keep it as south as you can. Take M Street and any of those beltway lanes instead of heading towards downtown, because Adam, it really is a mess from what I can see.
Yeah, Lindsay Nance, thank you so much. And the good thing about what we're expecting here is that this is all going to happen lickety-split. As soon as Donald Trump finishes in court, he's going to get back in the car, he's going to head back to the airport and leave. He's not going down the street to Georgetown to get tacos or a hamburger or anything. He's going to be in Miami, lickety-split out of town. Casey Nolan with us now to talk more about the scene and how this has affected sort of internal Washington. And I know that you've been walking around here for a bit, talking to some of the folks who are walking around here. Not a ton of protesters, exactly.
Not a ton. There are folks, some who are more visible than others. Bullhorns, a Trump mask.
All right, I'll take things back. Looks like we're working on some technical things, but we'll keep this going. And of course, we've been talking about the fact that this is really an event for the history books, but it is one we want to make sure that you know what to expect. So let's talk about what you'll see and what you won't see. Our Evan Kozloff is following this part of the story. We know the president is in the courtroom right now. What is likely to be happening inside, and how long will this take?
Here, Leslie, where the president's going to be charged with attempting to overturn the election. But what we're not going to see is any photos of him inside the courtroom. Let's show you some photos if we have it from back when he was in New York. Yeah, we're not going to see any photos like this. That's because this is happening in federal court, and the federal rules of criminal procedure ban them. His New York appearance, as we mentioned back in April, was in state court. Now, here's what we will have, we can verify. We're going to have a sketch artist in the courtroom. His name is William Hennessy, who's the artist behind many high-profile and local court sketches. Also, our reporter, Jordan Fisher, he's there, so that's how we're going to be able to tell the story of this historic hearing. Now, as soon as the hearing ends, we're going to hear from Jordan, and we're going to show you those sketches so you know exactly what happened. Leslie?
That's really the only image we've seen just yet of the president emerging from his plane, arriving at Reagan National, getting right into a car so he could head over to the court. We're going to go back to the court to talk a little bit more with my colleague Adam Longo, who is there with Casey Nolan. They were just starting to talk a little bit about contextually what this experience has been like for Washingtonians who call this home and are dealing yet again with all of the changes and the road closures and just the pulse of the city right now. Ads, you're talking with Casey?
Yeah, let's pick up the conversation where you left off in talking to folks around here about where they sit.
Yeah, and because I do think, to Leslie's point about how it's affecting us locally, most of the people here seem to have not come from very far. There might be some tourists who've come off the mall, but it doesn't.
I've heard a number of different languages while walking
True,
around.
as
here.
you will in downtown DC on any given day. But nevertheless, I was just making the point earlier that the thing that struck me is you hear the conversations between people. They're not just divided on whether this is a fair trial or whether he should have been charged or he's responsible. There are people divided on whether the footage from January 6th is even true. So that is one stark thing that stood out to me. And I'm talking about folks who are not necessarily on the bullhorns or have the costumes on. These are just people who are at very different ends of given facts on this particular case.
These are not people who are from the district or the surrounding area.
Hard to say. The ones I talked to, they didn't want to give me too much about themselves. Yeah. To end that point, though, on a positive note, one of them said, at least we're being civil, where there is no violence. It is American to disagree. So, but back to the larger point of how is this affecting people locally? Last night, we did go to Capitol Hill, the neighborhood, and talked to people there who, depending on how long they had lived there, I got different reaction from people about how worried they were about today. But certainly that is a neighborhood where the events of January 6th are personal, that was in their backyard, and they certainly have a vested interest in the outcome of this case.
Yeah, I know we have that piece standing by. Let's see if we can go to that now.
When this is your neighborhood.
Capitol building's such a big looming presence. It's I don't know, it's cool to see.
Security can often be part of the view too.
I consider it to be a very special place.
Etta Felix has called the Capitol Hill neighborhood home for more than 40 years and says the past couple have had some challenges.
On January 6th, we could hear the cacophony. We could hear the rioters at the Capitol. The fencing from hell that never went away took 2 years. And then pandemic comes, like, okay, how else can we change life? How else can we really mess this up?
Now, a return trip to DC by former President Trump is on the minds of some here, uncertain about what his court appearance just blocks away could mean for life on this side of the Capitol.
I mean, definitely considering, what happened on January 6th, definitely, I would say there's cause for concern, or at least, being vigilant.
Yeah, hopefully it's not a big hassle for us. Ideally, we wouldn't have any traffic jams or blockades or anything, but I know that's been a problem in times past.
Others say when this is your neighborhood, you learn to live with history and the security that can come with it.
Capitol has its own self-contained police department, right? So let them worry about the Capitol.
And I feel like since DC is a relatively left-leaning area, I don't think there will be too much of a hubbub like there was on January 6th. And he's not tweeting about it going to be wild or anything like that.
And if there is any trouble, Etta says they can handle that too.
We rebuild. Life goes on. Fencing came down.
So picking up what the man said there in the piece, and to what you were alluding to, yes, most of Capitol Hill, most of D.C. is very blue, if you will. There are Trump supporters in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, for sure. But I think, yes, if you see the more vocal folks here supporting the president, they are most likely not from D.C.
Right. None of the folks here who lived in town, who went through January 6th, are doubting the authenticity of the video or anything.
Like the woman said, she could hear it from her house. Yeah. She didn't have to see it on TV. They could walk down and see it for themselves.
Yeah. All right, Casey, thanks. I know we'll talk again a little bit later in the show. I want to bring you up to speed on what's happening with the former president in court right now. The case was just called a couple of minutes ago. I'm getting that via tweets from our reporter Jordan Fisher, who is sitting in the courtroom, saying that the chief judge of the federal district court is actually in the well observing all of the proceedings happening. The case has been called. Special counsel Jack Smith is there in the room along with Trump, his attorneys, and the prosecutors and the defense attorneys as well, getting ready to hear this case. We don't expect this arraignment to last very long. We are expecting, once it does wrap up, for Jordan to be able to come out here to be able to take us through some of what was happening inside of the courtroom and how it may or may not be different from anything that's unfolded with some of the previous January 6th defendants who have appeared here in the federal district court. Leslie?
When Jordan comes out, and we'll get right back to you, Ads. Thank you so much. We're going to dig deeper now on what's at stake for former President Trump, and we're going to check in with Paul Schiff-Berman. He is a professor with the George Washington University School of Law. Thank you for being here with us this afternoon, Professor. You've said this is the most significant court case in American history. So let's start there.
Absolutely. We've never had a situation where a president is alleged to have taken part in a conspiracy to really overthrow the government, to overturn an election, to stay in power through authoritarian means. This has never happened. And so what happens in the next period of time with this trial, whether a guilty verdict is found or a not guilty verdict is found, is really cataclysmic for the country and supremely important for the rule of law. If we care about democracy, if we care about not going into authoritarian rule, then we have to care that this trial gets handled well.
What seems to be central to this case the government is making is that President Trump knew he was telling falsehoods. He was aware of it. He was not in the dark. That the people closest to him, who work for him in the White House, in DOJ, were telling him this is not true. How are they going to prove that, though?
Well, so first of all, we have to understand that you can't just say, I was deluded, I'm, hearing voices from Mars, and therefore I thought I won the election, and expect that that's good enough to be a defense, right? It has to be a reasonable belief. And there seems to be allegations in this indictment that, first of all, Trump may have said on a number of occasions that he lost, but also that all of his closest advisors, all of the people he turned to for advice, were telling him, that's the Attorney General, that's his Vice President, that's his Chief of Staff, that's his General Counsel, that's the head of the Cybersecurity Agency. Everybody was telling him that there was no possibility that he won this election and that there was enough fraud to change the outcome. So whatever his belief might be, it wouldn't be a reasonable belief. At least that's the argument that Jack Smith will make. And in addition, even if he did have a reasonable belief that he won the election, the way to handle that is to challenge it in court. Right? So you don't go and then create a whole conspiracy to create a slate of false electors and call up secretaries of state of the different states and tell them to go find votes. If you think that you won the election and that there was election fraud, you go into court and you prove it. That's what Al Gore did, for example, in going into Florida to try to get a recount of the election in 2000. So that's how you handle it. So I think this idea that, well, he was deluded, he must have believed that he won the election and therefore there's no case, I think that's just not right.
The Trump legal team is also making this case about free speech, too, that he's allowed to say what he thinks he believes, to telegraph that. But the government is saying, yeah, you could say that. But what we're laying out in this case is not only we're not building on this on what you said, we're building this on what you are alleged to have done.
Yeah, you can go on television if you're the president and you can say whatever you want. Even if you knew it was false, you can lie on television, and that would be First Amendment protected speech. But what we're talking about here is not just saying, I won the election. It's saying, can you find votes, oh Secretary of State? It's saying to state legislators, get together a alternative group of electors. It's putting pressure on the Justice Department to say that there was election fraud and to start impounding voting machines. And all of that is not speech. That's conspiracy. So if I say to you, let's go rob a bank, that's speech, but it's not protected by the First Amendment. It's a crime.
So the government is laying out this indictment. They spend a fair amount of time, pages really, laying out this scheme and how these fake slates of electors would be created and how they would essentially forge documents in order to keep the president in office. I'm thinking about the co-conspirators that are not listed here but are listed as co-conspirators throughout this entire document here. What happens to them as a result of what happens in court today?
So there are 6 co-conspirators that are not named but are referred to in this indictment. Based on the facts that are alleged about them in the indictment, we can pretty easily identify 5 of them. The 6th one is a little bit unclear. There's been speculation. But we're talking about Rudy Giuliani, and we're talking about Sidney Powell and Ken Cheeseborough and John Eastman and Jeffrey Clark. And all of these people could be added to this indictment at any time. There's no rush.
So is this motivation to try to get them to talk?
I think there's probably 2 motivations on Jack Smith's part. One is to keep the focus on Trump and keep this a streamlined case. He's going to be trying to argue for a speedy trial, and so I think he wants to keep it simple. But also, this is a final warning, I think, to those 6 individuals that they need to come forward and testify and provide evidence against Trump or face consequences that they could be the next one indicted.
As you just mentioned, the president says he wants a speedy trial. He also wants a trial that's not here. He is requesting a change of venue, which I guess about a dozen other January 6th defendants have done, but not successfully. How likely is it that this trial will move from D.C. to West Virginia? And I should tell you, we just heard that the former president entered a plea of not guilty in court, which was anticipated.
Right, not surprising. Yeah, you know, the West Virginia gambit is just ludicrous on its face, right? So the federal venue statute makes clear that the venue where you bring a case is where the acts that are alleged to have created the criminal act that you're talking about also took place. So in this case, almost all the acts took place in Washington, D.C., and none of the acts took place in West Virginia. I mean, in theory, you could have an argument for Arizona or Wisconsin or Georgia or Pennsylvania, where at least there were some fake electors doing stuff. But there's no argument for West Virginia. And besides that, if the basis for a venue transfer was to try to come up with a jury pool that was 50-50 Republican and Democrat, you would have every criminal trial in the country would have to be held in a swing state. It's just unworkable, and I think that's not going anywhere. What really is going to happen is we're going to go forward in D.C., and Trump's lawyers, along with Jack Smith and the judge, will get to vet every single potential juror to see whether they are so biased, either in favor or against Trump, that they could not put that aside, put their political beliefs aside, and just listen to the evidence and decide based on the evidence. And that's what happens in every trial.
How hard is that going to be in a case like this, where, you know, everyone around the world was watching what happened on January 6th? And were gripped. And then we had the hearings. And so we saw this again and again and again. So how hard is it going to be able to, for them to put together an impartial jury?
Well, I've actually served on 2 juries, and so I have a tremendous belief in the jury system. I think jurors take their responsibility very seriously, and I think you will be able to find 12 people, not everyone, but you will be able to find 12 people who can put aside whatever their political beliefs are. So maybe they're a Republican, maybe they're a Democrat, but they can put that aside and say, is this person actually guilty based on the facts that are presented in this trial? And by the way, it's not just a question of, well, did January 6th happen or not? The question has to do with this entire conspiracy and all of these different acts and Trump's state of mind and so forth. And all of them have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think that there are jurors who will be able to say, for example, if you're a Democrat, I didn't vote for Donald Trump. I think he's a menace to society. I think he's was a bad president and would be a bad president. But nevertheless, I'm going to be an impartial juror. The judge is going to instruct me about the facts and the law, and I'm going to rule based on my understanding of that case. And I think that that's not far-fetched at all.
You've called this the most significant court case in American history, and yet most of us won't be able to actually see what's happening in the courtroom. There are some calls from people to televise this particular court case. Is that even possible?
I would love to see this trial televised, but I'm actually in favor of televising all trials unless there's something, a national security reason or some kind of privacy reason not to do so. I think it's important for the American people to see our justice system at work. When I clerked at the U.S. Supreme Court, I often invited friends to come sit and watch the proceedings. And what I found universally is that people who actually watch the Supreme Court at oral argument, even those justices they thought they were going to disagree with because of political position or judicial philosophy, they came away impressed at the seriousness of the dialogue, the discussion, the fact that it was really based on the law and not just politics and so forth. And so I actually think it would help both the Supreme Courts and the federal courts generally. I think it would help their legitimacy in the eyes of Americans if we could see what was going on.
You mentioned Supreme Court. I mean, Justice Roberts is essentially the head of the federal court system. He would have to weigh in, wouldn't he, if there were to be a move to televise these cases?
So there's the Chief Justice Roberts is the Chief Justice of the United States, which means he is the administrative head of the federal court system. That's partly ceremonial, it's partly sort of administrative. I guess it is possible that he could ask for these to be televised. I think it's not likely. And I think it's even less likely that Judge Chutkan would do it by herself, because that would potentially open up an avenue for an appeal. If Donald Trump were convicted, he could appeal and say, well, because of all of these cameras, it sort of changed the atmosphere in the courtroom, or it prejudiced the jurors against me, or whatever. And that, in and of itself, I think, would be a potential grounds for appeal. So I think she's not going to do it.
There's a lot more to get to, certainly. We're taking a look right now at what's happening around the courtroom. As we've heard, the president is in the courtroom, has entered a not guilty plea to these federal charges, and we are awaiting how this wraps up and what happens next. One of the questions I have is, will we find out today what this next court date will be, or is that something that will happen when this case is before Judge Chutkan?
Well, I think what's going to happen here is just before the magistrate judge. We will have a hearing and a scheduling meeting probably early next week with Judge Chutkan, and that's when we will get the first indication of at least what the initial trial date might be. Now, of course, Jack Smith is going to push to do this quickly. I think there's an argument that it is supremely important, particularly in this case, to have this trial occur before the election, because the American people need to know one way or another what this now candidate Trump did when he was president. And that's an important issue to be discussed and understood before you vote. So he's going to try to argue for that. Trump's lawyers obviously are going to argue for delay. They would like this to happen after the election in hopes that maybe Trump can win the election and then scuttle the entire federal indictment. So that will be a key question. And also, how will this fit in with the other cases that are going forward involving Trump? I think arguably this one, again, has the most significance for our democracy and for electoral politics. And so I think there's certainly an argument for this one to go first. But whether that will happen, we just don't know.
All right, Professor, we're going to keep talking about this, but for now, we're going to go back over to our Evan Kosloff, who is getting some reaction from what's happening right now.
Right, we're very fortunate to have Jordan Fisher in the room right now, and if you haven't followed him yet, you should go on Twitter and follow him. It's Jordan on Record. He's got a number of tweets which he's putting up from inside the courtroom as he watches it all. Let's read you this one right here. Former President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty to all 4 counts. As we were mentioning, that is expected. The government is not going to be seeking detention, he writes. Here's another part. The judge warns former President Donald Trump that under the conditions of his release, he must not retaliate against anyone providing information to the prosecution or otherwise obstruct justice. Again, that's from Jordan Fisher, who's been following these cases ever since January 6th, all the people that were there on that day, and he's continuing to do so from inside the courtroom. So again, go follow that Twitter account and follow us right here, where we're going to continue to put on air what Jordan has to say. Leslie?
Yeah, and looking forward to speaking with Jordan once he's able to leave the courtroom about all of the contours of this appearance too. Evan, thank you. We're going to get to some reactions from people who support the former president. Our Rafael Sanchez Cruz is live near the courthouse to tell us a bit more about that. Rafa, what are you hearing?
That's right, Leslie. Well, I want to kind of show people the situation right now. The crowd in the last hour has definitely grown. I know we've talked to Adam, who's actually across the street at the courthouse. Well, I'm on the other side of Constitution Avenue, where people have been gathering, and I want to show you what we've seen a lot throughout the day. A lot of this, a lot of back and forth, people going, discussing politics, discussing their support for the president, for the former president, and those that are against the former president. We've heard a lot of conversations regarding gender identity and politics throughout the afternoon, and there have been some minor clashes between those that are against the former president and those that are here in D.C. to simply support him. I asked everyone I spoke to one simple question: does this third indictment sway your support for Donald Trump? And they all said no. His supporters say that these criminal charges are an attempt to stop him from running again in 2024, and they believe that those legal woes will simply strengthen his base. A woman who says she's a Ward 8 DC resident says she stands by his actions as well as the people of January 6th. And let's listen more to what she had to say.
I'm down here to support President Trump and to support the January 6th defendants. I've actually been advocating and following the cases of these January 6th defendants and the weaponization of the Department of Justice against individuals who are peacefully exercising the First Amendment. I've sat through months and months of court cases, watched the evidence that's been put on the screen of police acting brutally and violently against protesters who are not yet engaged in violence.
Are you a McCarthyite? And sentiments like these were echoed throughout the afternoon. A lot of people just questioning what happened on January 6th. So far, we've seen no arrests, but again, those back and forths throughout the afternoon, those minor clashes, and we'll obviously stay on for 5, 6 to continue speaking to people about this historic day and what it really means to support the former president as he faces this third indictment. I'm live in Northwest. Back to you, Leslie.
All right, Rafa, thank you. There's certainly a lot to get to this afternoon. Our Adam Longo is out leading our team coverage live outside the D.C. Federal Courthouse. Adam, what are you hearing now?
So, Leslie, a light rain has started to fall. I don't know if you saw that from Rafael's shot, but that has served to sort of disperse a few of the folks who have just been taking in the scene now. In fact, as I'm talking, the rain seems to be getting a little bit heavier. But traffic on Pennsylvania Avenue is flowing as you would expect to flow or not flow coming up on rush hour on a random weekday. Do have a bit of breaking news that we can tell you here from following Jordan Fisher's tweets from inside of the courtroom. We know now that on August 28th at 10 a.m. that is going to be the next hearing in this case. That will be before District Judge Tanya Chutkin, who will oversee the case. After that, we're learning from Jordan that the Department of Justice has 7 days to file a requested trial date, and then Donald Trump's attorneys will have 7 days to respond after that. I get the feeling that what a lot of people want to see out here who are milling about is Trump actually leaving the building. We know that that will happen very soon after this hearing wraps up. It doesn't look like that will be from a vantage point that we will be able to see here on our location at 4th Street in Pennsylvania. But for the time being, folks are just milling about, moving up and down the sidewalk. Occasionally you hear speakers, bullhorns. There was a woman blowing through a hollowed out tree limb. So there's a random carnival-like atmosphere out here, just with this massive event, the center of the political universe right now, of course, with Congress being on recess, the Supreme Court being out of session, the President of the United States, President Biden, on vacation. So we know that everything that's happening politically right now is literally happening in this building behind us. Of course, the former President Trump would have us to believe that all of this is a political act that is unfolding right now. So as we wait to hear more information from inside of the courtroom with Jordan Fisher. Leslie, we'll send it back to you, and as soon as he comes out here, we'll be able to bring back and give you some more perspective. Actually, we're going to bring it in back to Lindsay Nance, who's going to talk to us about some of the traffic impacts that we can expect this evening.
That's right, Adam. And the rain is definitely not going to help our road situations. So Sky 9 is up right now showing you downtown traffic conditions, trying to get a closer look at what exactly is going on there. But I can tell you from what I've seen on my overhead traffic maps, 395 is our slowest point, as well as the 3rd Street Tunnel. If you're trying to take the metro home or going towards downtown, I've been checking in with WMATA all day, and we haven't seen any major delays due to this going on downtown. But we do currently have a Silver Line delay to Ashburn, so just a heads up there if that's your train. Here's what we're dealing with on the road weather index and traffic flow map. You can see where we are starting to get damp on the roadways, so a heads up if you are trying to head in towards downtown. Slowest traffic I'm following right now for you, again, is going to be 395 heading in towards the downtown corridor and then the 3rd Street Tunnel, and we did even have some temporary traffic stops going on in the 3rd Street Tunnel. I think those have been cleared up, but use caution through that area as we do have those rolling road closures in place. Other than that, the only newest closures that I've seen are going to be right around C Street as well as 3rd Street Northwest, Indiana Avenue and Constitution Avenue. So basically right around the Capitol and right around the courthouse is the main area I would avoid, and also where a lot of those protests are taking place right now. So here's what's opened up for you. 395 is open but slow. I wouldn't necessarily take that. 695 is also another good option for you, as well as Mass Ave and Northwest. If you can go through Navy Yard, that might be your best bet if you are trying to head around downtown and skip that traffic. Back to you.
All right, thank you, Lindsay. Right now, we're going to focus on what happens next. This, of course, is the 3rd time former President Trump has been criminally charged. Abby Larico is here to verify a timeline of what's next.
Timing really seems to be top of mind for both sides in this case. Former President Trump posting his questions and frustrations to Truth Social, asking why this has to happen in the middle of his presidential campaign. Meantime, Jack Smith has once again pushed for this case to proceed with a speedy trial. So let's verify the fast facts on how quickly this can and must proceed. We turn to the Cornell Legal Institute and the Department of Justice. First, why not present the case 2.5 years ago, asks Trump on social media. Though that's when the insurrection at the Capitol took place, the DOJ only appointed Smith to handle Trump's federal cases last November. Now to the timeline moving forward. Turns out a speedy trial has a legal definition in the Speedy Trial Act. It requires federal trials to begin, quote, 70 days from the date the indictment was filed or from the date the defendant appears before an officer of the court in which the charge is pending, whichever is later. However, this doesn't include time added for procedures like pretrial motions. There are expected to be quite a few of those in this case, and they can take weeks to resolve. Along with here in D.C., the former president is also facing charges in New York and in Florida. And in regards to that ongoing investigation in Georgia about possible attempts to change the vote outcome, CBS News is reporting that any charging decisions are expected to come out in the coming weeks. With your Verify, I'm Abby Larico.
All right, back now to talk a bit more is George Washington University law professor Paul Schiff-Berman to give us some additional insight on the case. So we know now the next court appearance will be August 28th. This is a little bit longer than you initially thought it would take to have this next one, right?
That's already a longer timeline than I thought.
What does this tell us, though?
I think it tells you that the justice system and Judge Chutkan and the magistrate judge want to make sure nobody is being railroaded, that there can't be an argument in good faith that this is not proceeding with full due process. So she's going to give Jack Smith's team 7 days to argue for one trial date. She's going to give the President Trump's team a chance to 7 days to just say why they think it should be delayed, and then there's going to be a hearing. So I think this is moving along, but it's a sign, I think, already that it's not going to be done on an extremely expedited basis. I think because of concern about making sure it is very, very fair because, as I said, this is such an historically important trial.
And a political one, as we're finding too, because there are some people who believe that this whole thing has exposed the politicization of the Department of Justice. And when you look through this document here, I mean, there's a lot to kind of go through here. But what do you say to folks who believe that that is happening with this case already?
I think one of the worst consequences of all of this and of Trump's repeated tweets to his supporters and his statements is that so many Americans now seem to believe that the FBI and the Justice Department and the whole rule of law is just a political witch hunt. And it's just not true. Jack Smith is the special prosecutor. The Biden White House and Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, have bent over backwards to have no communication with Smith about his charging decisions or his timeline or anything. He's operating independently. He's been interviewing, it seems like, Mark Meadows, the Trump's chief of staff. He's got Vice President Pence in there, seems to have provided a lot of information. There's a lot of witness testimony here. This is not just somebody off the seat of their pants saying, oh, I want to prosecute the president. This is a lot of data that has been brought together, and we're moving methodically, and the trial is going to happen in the way trials are supposed to happen. And so I think you have to believe in the rule of law operating here. And I see no indication that this is a political prosecution. I was pleased to see William Barr, the former Attorney General for Trump, and certainly from a long time a Trump loyalist, made it very clear that he didn't think that politics was entering into Jack Smith's process at all.
You mentioned Mark Meadows, and I think some people have found it interesting that in these 45 pages, there is no mention of Mark Meadows, who was right by the president's side on January 6th in this document. Yeah. Does that tell us that he is perhaps cooperating?
That's why I think that he is cooperating, is that I think he might have been named as a co-conspirator or at least been talked about more in this indictment. But I suspect that he has been talking to the special prosecutor's office and that some of this information comes from him. We have to, I think, just acknowledge that there's a lot of Republicans in here, a lot of Trump loyalists who nevertheless stood up and said, you didn't win the election. And these are people who were very supportive of Trump. And so, you know, that's both at in the White House and also people at the state level who resisted the pressure that was put on them. And these people are real heroes because they put the country ahead of their loyalty to an individual.
And you see that time and again in this document, both when they lay out the scheme, when they lay out the efforts to try to convince the vice president to go along and fraudulently play this game. And he said no time and again, and again. My colleague, Adam Longo, who is out at the courthouse, has some questions that he wants to ask you too. Ads, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you. Professor, I'm wondering, for all of the motions and the court dates that will play out in this trial, starting, of course, first on August 28th, is it required, would we expect to see the former president appear in court other than his initial appearance here today?
I would not expect to see Trump in court until the actual trial happens. All of this pre-trial wrangling and hearings and motions to suppress and discovery questions and other kinds of motions that might occur are almost certainly going to happen through lawyers without Trump being present.
And then as far as the scope and the timeline of this case, I know that you and Leslie addressed that just a moment ago, but Jordan Fisher, who's going to join us here, was tweeting that the Trump's attorneys inside of the courtroom were saying that they first of all, they want discovery, and that the prosecutors say that they are expecting to hand over mounds of discovery here shortly. But the point I'm trying to make is that Trump's defense team does not believe that a speedy trial would be likely or probable here. And given that we're 15 months away now from the general election, assuming President Trump were to win the Republican nomination and move forward in an election against President Biden, they'd be up against clock, prosecutors would, and it would behoove the defense in this case to try to delay. Am I laying that out correctly?
Absolutely. I mean, generally criminal defendants want to delay because the longer it goes before their trial, the more freedom they have. But certainly in this case, there's an extra impetus to delay because if Trump becomes president, there are multiple ways in which he could scuttle this entire prosecution. So he certainly is going to want to delay. I think Jack Smith has an argument that this case, because it goes to the heart of overthrowing the government and overthrowing the democracy and installing authoritarianism, should happen and needs to happen before the next election because the American people need to have that information before they vote. But it is true that there's a lot of witnesses. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, does the former president's attorneys have an advantage, have a point here when they say the entire scope of this and all of the potential witnesses that would have to be called, and the fact that this conspiracy that the government is alleging involves 7 different states, that is a lot of material evidence to be brought to bear. I heard one interview this morning where he said that he speculated, President Trump's lawyers here, that this trial itself could go 6 months to even a year long.
Certainly there are a large number of witnesses, there's a large amount of documentary evidence. As you say, the plot involving the fake electors involved multiple different states. And so yes, this is complicated. On the other hand, it doesn't involve classified documents, so you don't have the same kinds of security clearance concerns that you have in the Florida case. But I think it certainly is going to be hard to get this case tried before the election. But I also think it's extraordinarily important that Jack Smith try to get the case charged and tried before the election.
Professor, understood. Thank you. I want to point out that you're seeing live pictures here of the motorcade that is headed back to National Airport. You can see them approaching right now the 14th Street Bridge. You can see that Secret Service officials are taking the motorcade through, that in the route that they've taken, traffic was not closed off, so the former president's motorcade is moving with some other traffic. Our Jordan Fisher, who is inside of the courtroom, he has just left the courtroom. He is back with us here on the scenes. We can leave this up on the screen so we can follow the motorcade's progress to the airport. Jordan, you have covered many of these January 6th cases, and so I want to go through things with you chronologically about what happened inside of the courtroom in the courthouse. But the first thing I wanted to ask you was, did anything stand out to you as being different from this first appearance than what you've seen in other first appearances that you've covered here at the courthouse?
Well, the most obvious difference is that the courtroom was filled with Secret Service agents. There were 6 to 7 agents behind the president. There were more of them at the entrance to the courtroom. The gallery was very well managed. There were only a few seats for the public. There were only a few seats for the press. One other thing I noticed about the president is, if you think about his normal public appearance that we've seen from him over his entire career, over his entire political career, his professional career, a very different President Trump in court today. Calmer, sedated, quieter, very somber, seeming to take it very serious what was happening in the courtroom and then the felony charges he faces. So that was just kind of a different President Trump.
Yeah, an interesting thing to see, given that cameras were not in there to capture it. The only images that we'll get from inside of the courtroom are coming from the sketch artist. Hopefully we'll be able to have those to share shortly. So what actually happened inside the hearing? How long was it? The special counsel, I heard, was there himself, but he was not part of the proceedings. So sort of take us through the nuts and bolts of the proceedings.
Yeah, let me walk you through it a little bit. The special counsel was in there. Jack Smith walked in along with 2 of the assistant U.S. attorneys who have been helping with the grand jury investigation. In many ways, it was a very normal initial appearance. The former president sat down. The magistrate judge read the charges against him. She read the conditions of his release, which are, again, very standard, except for one thing she noted, that he is prohibited from speaking with any of the assumed witnesses in the case unless he does so through counsel. She made a point of telling him that he cannot retaliate against anyone who is providing information to the government, that he's not allowed to obstruct justice in any particular way. You don't hear that during a normal initial hearing, so that was a little unusual, but otherwise he was treated in the same way any other defendants would be treated.
So, Jordan, stand by. We're going to transition to go back to television here on WUSA 9 from our streaming, but we want you here to be able to provide us some of this important context. So, Leslie, we'll bring it back into you for now. We'll have much more from Jordan from out here at the courthouse coming up in just a moment, live on the air on WUSA 9.
Yeah, we'll see you all in just a minute, but we want to thank everybody for joining our special coverage of former President Trump's arraignment. Right now, we're going to take a brief pause to get ready for the news at 5, so don't go anywhere. Our coverage will continue in just a few minutes. We'll be right back.